Welcome to the Thriving Misfits, the podcast where we celebrate resilience, embrace diversity, and challenge norms. I'm your host, Fiona Young, and today we're thrilled to introduce Alicia Lui, a dynamic advocate for sustainable development, gender equity, and sports empowerment. As the founder of Women in Sports Empowered Hong Kong, or called WISE, Alicia harnesses the power of sports to exhilarate leadership skills for women and girls. Her commitment extends to publishing sporty girls journals, inspiring girls to embrace sports participation. Alicia's diverse backgrounds in sports development, nonprofits, education, and sustainable finance fuels her passion for creating inclusive communities and promoting environmental protection. So join us as we explore Alicia's journey and her impactful work in empowering others through sports and sustainable development. Hi, Alicia. Welcome on the podcast.
Hi, Fiona. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Great. It's amazing to still keep in touch after so many years. And you and we actually met at a global youth organization, ASEC, for the Hong Kong chapter. They invited us to be mentors. Do you remember in 2017, right?
That's right. At Baptist University, now that you mentioned it. I can't believe it's been so many years.
And
And
we
I
still
think,
kept in touch. Yeah.
yeah, and it was the start of the charity, but it was also when you were just leaving Shell and starting your own consulting business, right?
Yes, absolutely. And remember, we had our side hustler community. Yeah.
Yes.
Inspiring people to, first of all, establish their own side hustle and also feel more free to talk about it. Especially a lot of us in Hong Kong were in corporate, and some of us had to keep our side hustles a little bit hush hush. And I remember you were actually one of our first guests to help inspire future side hustlers and existing side hustlers.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Now that you mentioned all of it so long ago.
I know. So let's kick
Mm.
it off with a rapid fire round. If you could create a new Olympic event that celebrates diversity and inclusion, what would it be called and what unusual skill would be involved?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this and I took the cheater's way, which is probably not very ethical in sport. But I was thinking about this because I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And rather than, like invent a new sport, I thought about looking at existing policies and the existing structure of sports. And for me, I actually think that there's a lot of room to have, for example, mixed gender sports events, which some sports already do. But when I also think about mixed gender sports, I think of mixed intersectionality. For example, you have the Olympics and the Paralympics at different times, and not all Paralympians are the same in the sense that they have different categories. So, what if, as an example, you could have events that are mixed intersectionality, like the actual physical or neurodiversity or whatever considerations that go into having the Paralympics. And then the other thought that I had was, for example, when you have team-based events at the Olympics, what if you enforce certain dynamics around diversity and inclusion? So, for example, you have certain sports that might look like the team is exactly the same. So what if you, at a participation, like when the team applies or they make it to the Olympics, there are certain criteria around the team composition. So that's what I went instead of inventing a new sport.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I'm sure it's going to be insightful and interesting to see that. So, if you were to form a sports team made up of fictional characters from diverse backgrounds, who would be your star players and why?
Right. And so I looked at it from a sport that I currently play, which is I play ultimate frisbee, and it's a 7-on-7 sport. And although ultimate frisbee in the world is already relatively progressive. We have mixed leagues, a lot of our teams are quite diverse. But being on a team in Hong Kong, I was also thinking about sort of the gaps. And I would definitely love to see more, for example, in Hong Kong, on my own team, for example, more ethnic diversity, more diversity in religion, and so cultural practices, and sort of build understanding around that. For example, in Hong Kong, I've been playing for 20 years
Wow.
plus on and off. I've only recalled one person who is has a birth defect, I suppose, and so has one actual hand to play in 20 years in Hong Kong. So I don't think we're very inclusive in that sort of way of encouraging people to come and play. Um, our sport, we have hand signals as a form of communication. So from that perspective, I already think is quite conducive to including, for example, people who have hearing loss, because we already have learned how to communicate with hand signals. Um, I think we're relatively inclusive in terms of age and to some extent gender, because we have mixed gender and we do have people playing across age. But of course, we have age groups. But I would still love to see more age inclusiveness in terms of, I don't know anyone in Hong Kong who's like 60 plus. I think we have a couple of people in their 50s playing, but no one really 60s plus. It might have something to do with just when the sport was played in Hong Kong. And so by nature of when it started to get played, the oldest are only in their 50s. But I actually think that in order to have more inclusion in our sport, we do need to start thinking about where are the gaps. Rather than have star players, I actually think about sort of the whole DEI. The whole DEI is not always about having the star players in order to perform. You can have the star players in terms of what we say development in outreach. And that's already a good star player because that's about contributing to growing the community and building an inviting environment to people to play.
So just knowing you for the past couple of years, I feel that you're um, super inspiring with regards to like turning around that thought into an action. So is this something that you want to kind of change? Because we always say that be the change you want to see, right? Is this something that you're maybe looking into as well?
At this moment, in my sport, no, not really. But a few years ago, I was part of the EDI, well, we call it EDI
Mhm.
committee. And I left in order to focus on the charity, and I went to a full-time job went back to a full-time job. So I was working part-time for a while, and then I went back to a full-time job. But I also think that um, I've been very outspoken before about having a women's development director before. And I would love if we had more people on the board level who could look at some of these other intersectionality that I was saying. We
Mm.
have started incorporating having more youth programs, but I don't think it's driven by inclusion so much as in every aspect. When you include more youth, they're the future generation. You want to start training them from young. So there's a different approach or angle to it.
Right, right. Okay, so I mean, the longest I've known you, you're just like the person I would go to when I think of sports, right? So, can you share a personal experience? There must be some pivotal moment in your childhood or in your early life that ignited your passion for promoting DEI in sports and also beyond.
Right. From a sports context, and I think this has something to do with me loving sports when I was growing up and loving boyish things when I was growing up. So, for example, I was given, like many girls, given Barbies and dolls, and I would never play with them. And I would always play with the Transformers and the G.I. Joes with my cousins. Um, Being jealous of my boy cousins when they could freely kick a football and go to the playground. And I was always told, yo, you shouldn't really be doing that. One, football is not very ladylike, but also my mom especially was had this misconception that playing football would make you really short. So it didn't really encourage me in that way from a young age. But also, like, when I thought about working in the sports industry, I was told countless times that, oh, it's not a very stable career for women, especially. It's a very difficult path for women to find success. And then when I was a bit older, I mean, still, I would say young, but not really young in my career because this was after my MBA. I was working for a management consulting firm, and as you know, as a consultant, you fly a lot. And
Mm.
so I was not living in Hong Kong, but I was flying from my home office to different locations to work. And I was so tired of it. I just asked if I could change to an internal role. The number of times I was asked when I was told people that I wanted to change to an internal role, the first assumption was, oh, is it because you want to start a family? And it wasn't. It was simply that I just didn't want to fly so much. I wanted to legitimately have time with my friends living in a city that wasn't even Hong Kong. So yeah, you do have a lot of these assumptions or stereotypes from young to old.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, these kind of questions, you always get it, especially when you're at a certain age. Is it time now to start a family? And then you might actually not get the opportunities that you want to because people, or especially the line manager, then expects you to maybe, start a family and then you'll be out of the workplace anyhow. So, yeah, I definitely resonate with that. Now, as the
Yeah.
founder of Women in Sports Empowered Hong Kong, or WISE, how do you ensure that the DEI principles are embedded in the organization's missions and also activities? And what steps do you take to foster a culture of inclusion and belonging for the members?
Sure. So like many women's focused organization, we actually have challenges recruiting the opposite gender into like board level participation into our programs sometimes, people who want to work for us. And so when we first started, we also learned you cannot just tell people that we are looking for male board members or that we're open to having men working in the company or that we would look for male facilitators to help us on some of the delivery of our programs. We actually have to show it
Mm.
and make it feel like for them to be part of the team, they feel valued and included, the whole idea of belonging. And so I think being a very small charity and just by nature of what we do have an advantage because we're small. So it can easily look like we have some diversity, but even in our very small existence, I can tell you we've had, yeah, a couple of male board members. But when we do recruitment, they're kind of in the minority who apply, but we definitely encourage and try as much as possible to have a board member. Um, when we have panel discussions, we always try to include one male panelist as opposed to all female panelists. When we recruited facilitators, we always have at least one or two this last year and this year. And on our team, for example, we've had a former colleague has been identified as he, um, and then someone who's a trans man. So
Mhm.
we have tried to be inclusive, and now we've got a little bit of um, I guess, ethnic diversity because
Mhm.
we've got one colleague who is born in Hong Kong, but parents are not from Hong Kong or not originally from Hong Kong. So I think it's not so much that we do it like their token representation. We definitely look at it from a perspective of what they can contribute and um, that they have the merit to be on the team. But I think it's really important to be aware that you don't want someone who looks exactly like you or thinks exactly like you And so be open to the fact that if you do have more diverse representation, your perspectives or your background context that may not always be the same. And it's okay and it's valued.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned it's all about diversity of thoughts as well. It's not just about the diversity aspects that people can visibly see, right? Like the
Yeah.
age, the gender, the ethnicity, but it's actually the thought diversity that's really important. We may all look the same, but then we have different opinions, different thoughts. And I think it's great that you're embracing that at Wise. And I also resonate a lot with what you just mentioned about, running a charity or running I would say like a network where typically we see where we support females. Then you have the males who are a little bit, they're feeling alienated. And this resonates with me because when I launched the first women's network for Shell Hong Kong, our male colleagues were also, well, first of all, they were saying that why do we need a women's network? Because we don't have a men's network, right? That's like the first question or that first remark that they typically say. But we have to be quite deliberate, and that's what you do at Wise. We need to be more deliberate in inviting these individuals to be part of it and to see that their perspectives are equally valued as well. And it's not just putting a specific gender or specific diversity aspect on the pedestal, but we actually really can thrive together and learn from each other. So that's really great what you're doing at Wise to make sure that you make a deliberate choice. And it's not about tokenism. Yeah. It's not about the token hire. Great. I'm sure. I mean, you share a lot of all these positive stories, success stories. I'm sure that there must have been some adversities that you faced, some specific challenges. So, is there something that you would like to share with us with regards to a specific challenge that you faced when it comes to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace? How did you overcome it? And also, like, what kind of lessons did you learn from this experience?
Sure. Actually, I remember at the beginning when we first started Wise, you kind of have both sides of the camp. There are people who are like, this is amazing what you're doing because women are definitely, underrepresented in sports. But then you have the people who maybe are questioning or just not and I'm saying it's not only men. We definitely had women who are like, why do you need to do this? I actually think Hong Kong is quite equal in terms of like gender equality. Look at the number of women who work in the workplace. We already have it so much better than some other places in the world. And I, so, those challenges, I think, is not so much a challenge as I think sometimes the awareness maybe is that they haven't thought about A or they haven't really thought about B, or maybe they come from an environment where they feel that it's equal because they haven't seen the other side or don't have the lived experience of the other side. And so I think a lot of what we do is education, but an opportunity for us to really think about, okay, if there are some people who don't necessarily see things or experience things the same way we do, how do we help them see that? And I also think that sometimes if you read in the news right now, um, I see, for example, there's a backlash against DEI in some of the corporate world. I've seen news, for example, the younger men generation maybe do not agree as much
Mm-hmm.
with gender equality.
Yep.
Maybe, they feel a bit left out, or maybe they feel for whatever reason. And then I remember some statistics that was actually launched by another NGO in Hong Kong about men who play sports actually have more conservative gender notions or gender stereotype notions. I I actually think that if I go back to the root cause or why some of these stereotypes or cultural practices or beliefs came about, I kind of think about where and why and how did it happen rather than fault it. and say, oh, this is stupid, this is so archaic. I actually think back to the context and how that has had a historical legacy, and then think about how do we change that? Because sometimes it's the questioning part that actually is lacking, right? It's not that people don't want to see things the way you see it. I think it's just like, if again, it is a part of the education. Like, if you don't question assumptions or how things have become the way they have become, then it's easy to see fault in the other person. Yeah.
Right, right. And I love that you just mentioned about this research study, especially on the Gen Z. I've also encountered a research study where they're saying that, especially the male Gen Zs, they don't resonate as much with the whole concept of DEI. They're much more conservative, right? And I mean, it may sound very mundane and almost funny, but it reminds me of that Barbie movie where Ken doesn't want to be just Ken, right? Like he doesn't want to be just the sidekick of Barbie, but and then he completely turned it around and very drastically so. And perhaps we're also seeing that generational divide right now with regards to embracing equity, where the male Gen Zs feel that maybe it's like tipping, going over the top, where we're focusing too much on females, on yeah, on these other diverse aspects that we talked about. But what you just mentioned is, some people, they don't realize, you mentioned the male athletes, they don't realize that this is how we see it, and the different perspectives. Just a very funny example, because I just started playing netball here in Malaysia. I've never played netball before, and I really enjoyed it. And what I noticed though is that the teams, and even my team, I'm the only Asian on the team, and we're in Malaysia. So it's just really weird for me to see that. And I just mentioned it. You know me, like I'm very candid, I'm very transparent. So I just told one of my teammates, I'm like, did you know this? I'm like the only Asian face, right? I'm not even like pure Asian, but I'm only Asian face on the playing field. And she said that, she actually said, oh, I didn't notice that. So they don't have that awareness because they're, again, it's all unconscious for them, right? So I think it's important for us to point it out and to highlight these things that are not necessarily apparent for the other, from the other perspective.
Yeah. And sometimes some people will be open to having conversations. Some people might be taken aback, but I guess it doesn't mean that if they're taken aback, there's not an opportunity to revisit the conversation
Mhm.
another
Absolutely.
time in the future, right? So, yeah. Um, but I guess actually, if you don't mind me, because earlier you asked me my previous background and how
Mm.
I got into promoting the DEI. I actually think that just to share another story, I feel like I'm a bit predisposed to it because of my upbringing, because I'm much closer to my mom's side than to my dad's side. My mom's side is from Chu, which is actually known to be quite have male a preference for male over female, but my paternal grandparents never really showed that. And so even from my mom's side, I think my mom, being the eldest, has always been the one who's cared for her family, but she's always been the one, because of that, who's been a very strong personality. So growing up, I had a strong sort of my role model, where she was the one who outlearned my dad. My dad was the one who really liked taking care of the household and doing all the things like packing for the trips, making sure things were organized. And so I think a lot of this is, even though they do have a lot of stereotypes that do go on, and I was brought up in, to some extent, with many um, traditional notions of how a girl should behave. But on the other side, my parents didn't always behave in that sort of way. And I do think, going back to how it all leads to what happens in the world now, is that I think a lot of people are not completely like against equality or diversity or inclusion. They just haven't been in a space or an environment to question that. So, like, I give that example. I'm predisposed to it because of what I experienced. My mom and dad, have very gender different, diverse roles in some sort of expect, but they were also the ones who expected me to be a very good girl, to study, to be the one who has to take care of them when I'm older. My mom is the one who always says, "Oh, you're always playing sports. You behave like a boy, not like a girl." And yet she's also the one who questions, who encourages me, not questions me. She's always been the one, together with my dad, encouraging me to get really active because she didn't experience that in her life. So I think most of us, maybe not most of us, maybe that's my own experience, but I think a lot of us grow up in this sort of like juxtaposition, right? And you have a bit of both. And if you can find that this is what is important to you, then you can go out and challenge that and question that and be like, why is it this way? Why is it so confusing for me? Why is this, like, is this really how it is, or is it not like that for everyone else? And I think sometimes we don't really talk openly about this. And so we always think that, you know what, I'm the only one who experiences what I experience, and probably not.
And you're right. We're not the only ones who experience that. And I think, having that open conversation, being open and having that courage to be vulnerable, to share all these stories, I think that's what helps us to connect with one another, that helps us to empathize and resonate and hopefully learn from each other. And together we can make a difference, right? It's not just one person. I'm sure you working with amazing individuals who are supporting you with your endeavors. Now, our podcast is called The Thriving Misfits. So I would love to hear from you. Is there any personal anecdote from your involvement in sports where you felt like a misfit? And how did you overcome those feelings to continue pursuing your passion?
Sure. Actually, when I went to business school, I didn't really play on sports teams, but I like to play basketball and football with the guys. But very often, if I played with the guys, I was either the only woman there or one of two. And at the very beginning, just when you're in a new environment, you don't really know the people very well yet. There is a little bit of hesitancy around physical contact. You don't know how other people are going to perceive you being on the field. Like, I'm not the most amazing player. I'm not saying that I can keep par with the guys who are very experienced, but I just enjoy being in an environment where I can play basketball and football. And there was a women's team for football, not for basketball, for football, but having gone to a few practices, I found that the level was just a little too low for me to truly enjoy it. And so I really struggled for a long time to be on which side, Should I keep going to the women's team where I belong, or should I just, do what I want and play with the guys, and if they don't care, why should I care? And it was it was oddly a struggle because I don't know that I should have experienced that or even felt that way. And in the end, I just said, look, if the guys don't care, why should I care?
Hmm.
If um if they sort of feel a bit hesitant about, let's say, tackling me or whatever, then I should be the one who lets them know it's okay. I don't mind it, right? They should not have to feel that they need to adjust for me. They need to trust that I can take care of my own body or learn to back away if I ever feel afraid of anything, right? And so I really learned that if you feel like you belong in neither, you have to assess what's the reason, what's the driver for you to be on whichever side, what's going to make you happier in the long run. And then if there are specific things that would work for you, just make sure you let other people know. And
Yeah.
then, yeah.
And I think that's also because you found your unique and diverse voice. You feel comfortable to be assertive, and I think this is a really important skill to have, that we need to speak up and advocate for ourselves.
And
Great.
I think at the end of the day is about, yeah, like for me, when it comes to sport, so much of it is about fun and being in an environment that you just enjoy.
Mm,
And I play sport because I like to learn, I like to develop. If I feel like I'm not learning or developing as a player, then it takes away a big part of that motivation for me. And then it just becomes not enjoyable. So
absolutely.
yeah.
I hope that whatever Alicia has shared today on sports is actually also an analogy for our lives, our personal and our work lives. So, as we wrap up today's episode, we extend our heartfelt thanks to Alicia for sharing her inspiring journey and invaluable insights with us. Remember, whether you're navigating the world of sports, the workplace, or life in general, embracing your uniqueness and advocating for inclusivity can lead to powerful, positive changes. We hope Alicia's words have resonated with you as much as with me and provided encouragement for anyone who may feel like a misfit. Embrace your differences, pursue your passions, and know that you are capable of making a meaningful impact in your community and beyond. So thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the Thriving Misfits podcast for more empowering conversations with changemakers like Alicia. Until next time, keep striving for inclusion, keep pursuing your dreams, and keep on making a difference.